a look at what's next for precision medicine. Please welcome Kevin Hrusovsky, the CEO of Quanterix and Powering Precision Health, here with the Atlantic's James Hamblin.
How's it going, Kevin?
Excellent. How you doing, Jim?
I'm good. So we've heard a little bit about precision medicine already from a few different speakers today. So can you give us a little background on Quanterix, what it is, and how you're approaching things differently?
Sure. Quanterix is a disruptive tools company that can see the equivalent of a grain of sand in 2,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools in blood. So as a result, it's able to see proteins in blood at their baseline levels when you're healthy, not just when you're diseased and they get elevated. So the big change here is being able to see health in blood as opposed to just being able to see disease.
So when we talk about getting, so it's more sensitive sorts of testing for disease as well, though, right? I mean, when we talk about more sensitive tests, I'm thinking we already have enormous burdens of disease that we know kind of right in front of our eyes. How does identifying more disease and more accurately defining health help us deal with what we already know is a big problem?
So the NIH started the original testing by being able to see concussions in soldiers in blood. This was about 3-4 years ago. They did a lot of publications around this ability. And I think there's two major ways that exquisite sensitivity in blood has translated itself. One is to be able to see it less invasively. Instead of doing a biopsy for cancers, or instead of doing a lumbar puncture for seeing brain health, look at the blood less invasively to see these markers that most people didn't even realize are in the blood. And there's now a lot of data showing correlations with what's in the cerebral spinal fluid or what's actually in a tumor. So being able to see it less invasively is the first major advance. The second major advance is being able to see disease earlier. If you can see just minor movements and all the inflammation markers, as an example, from their baselines, that's the beginning of that disease progression, and being able to see that very early when the disease might still be like a match that's lit as opposed to a raging forest fire like we know Alzheimer's might be by the time you see dementia. Being able to put that fire out when it's a match is something that the FDA themselves are really now starting to grab onto and look at biomarkers as a way to get a drug approved. This is some major changes just in the last few months. Even in the Alzheimer cascade, being able to look at a biomarker when it's still very early stage, when it's much easier for a drug to have an impact. So we're pretty excited that these biomarkers can allow you to see less invasively disease much earlier before symptoms.
And I know you've done some work in the area of traumatic brain injury, concussions. You talk about how biomarkers might help shape that debate.
Absolutely. It's probably, right now 70% of our sales. This is a very disruptive company. It really wasn't around 3-4 years ago. And the NIH initially discovered it with soldiers, and that quickly led to Roger Goodell and the NFL teaming up with General Electric for the Head Health Challenge, and we won that twice, being able to see concussions in blood.
Sorry, can you define the Head Health Challenge for us?
The Head Health Challenge was a NFL teamed up with General Electric to show that they really care about player safety, and concussions is a big issue. There's a $1 billion lawsuit in that landscape of the NFL from former players, and so when they teamed up, they actually awarded companies based on their ability to have credible science that can actually detect concussions. And we actually won that both times, and I got a lot of excitement. And that led to a lot of neurologists around the world buying the technology and publishing on many new biomarkers showing MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, a lot of different head health challenges. Seeing it in blood less invasively is a breakthrough. So that was the beginning, was in neurology. And so a lot of our focus initially was across neurology, where it continues. But now we've evolved it into oncology, where we think it's even more exciting, the ability to model the immune system and see it digitized so that any of the immune system that starts to upregulate, that you're able to track it and understand it very early. And particularly with a lot of the immunotherapies, the drug industry is beginning to utilize the technology to understand, like, why does an immunotherapy work with one patient, but it doesn't the next? Even like Jimmy Carter getting cleaned up, why did it work for him and not someone else? And being able to see quickly movements from baseline of the immune system is a key tool that's going to enable drug makers to make drugs less dosing and more effective and more safe, which is a key focus of the drug industry today.
So when we talk about oncology screening, I think about things like mammography and PSA and even rectal exams for prostate cancer, which after decades of doing these things, we later find that they actually don't increase, they don't improve morbidity and mortality, even though they made so much sense as screening tests. So how do we avoid repeating these sorts of errors as we get more and more sensitive screening tests in oncology?
It's a very key point around the clinical validity of the technology and the biomarkers. And Johns Hopkins and NYU Langone has done some work on seeing PSA in individuals that have had a radical prostatectomy, where 6 months after the radical prostatectomy, they get a 0 for their PSA level. But when we take those zeros with our technology, 0 isn't 0. What Johns Hopkins found is that if there was a certain level of PSA only detected with our technology and above, the cancer in retrospective trials came back aggressively within 1 year. If it was below a certain level, they found that the cancer didn't return for quite a number of years, I think 9 years, in fact. So those are examples of where the sensitivity can play a role in the area of PSA. In the area of the mammogram, today we know there's a lot of false positives. I think 100%, 50% of women will have a false positive over a 7-year period, which leads to a lot of anxiety, a core biopsy, sometimes a resection, many more mammograms, which might actually be triggering disease with all the radiation that you're getting. So one of our founder, who also founded Illumina, has actually dedicated his life right now to, he just got a triple appointment at Harvard, Dana-Farber, and Brigham and Women's. And he's running major trials of a blood test that runs numerous proteins, looking for much better understanding of that disease cascade, where I agree with you today, it can be somewhat over-analyzed, as a lot of different ailments could be. So the key here is not just the sensitivity, but the precision and the repeatability, and knowing that disease cascade. And the protein, we think, is a much more relevant molecular cascade to indicate that the disease has occurred, where the genes many times will tell you have predisposition or a high probability, like the BRCA mutation. But when that cascade actually triggers, that's when action really should be taken. And so we actually think seeing the protein at these exquisitely sensitive levels is a key advance, a tool that we think can really be deployed across all diseases, seeing them early.
So how do these get monitored? Would this be a wearable device? Is this something people annually get checked for all these different proteins, and it's like a dashboard, a warning dashboard?
So exactly, Jim. I mean, today it's a research tool. There's 200 third-party peer-reviewed publications. I think 23 of the top 25 pharma companies are now using the tool, and there's a lot of trials, phase 1, 2, and 3 with new drugs. So it's still in a research stage, but ultimately I see a vision where you can evolve it from treating with much better precision to actually preventing disease. And there's where the Fitbit or some of these wearables, I think, are incredible advances. But until you can look inside that 6 quarts of blood that traverses 60,000 miles of vascular structure in your body and really analyze what's going on in the blood, I think you can continue to advance the Fitbit or advance the Apple Watch to bring the dashboard in so you can watch your inflammation markers. If you have a child playing soccer and you're worried about the header and you're wondering, are you starting to move these neuromarkers in a negative way that someday they might have anxiety or depression or a lot of the downstream effects of concussions, monitor annually in a blood test these different biomarkers. We expect that someday that'll get incorporated with AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning into your own personal record, so that you will not only be looking at things like, heart rate and blood pressure, but you'll be looking at your actual markers for inflammation, for oncology, for neurohealth, for cardiology. So across the board, these biomarkers of inflammation are the beginning, and being able to see them at baseline levels, we think can get incorporated longer term.
Yeah. I want to go to a question or two, but just before that, whenever we talk about technologies like this, and you mentioned the example of like a soccer parent who's worried about their kid possibly doing too many headers and then maybe not, getting into Harvard, at least as I think of it. then how does this just not become the sort of technology that exacerbates these inequalities that we have, where there are some people who are obsessively monitoring every protein in their bodies, and there are many other people who don't have access to quality food and can't go outside of their homes because their neighborhoods are unsafe, and these basic things. So how does that not make things worse?
So we founded a new summit called Powering Precision Health. It's run here in Boston each year, and it's an attempt to really get at some of your questions, like where is it today that you're finding disease at such late stage, long before symptoms present, you could have caught it. And it seems like neurology and oncology are the two that we're most honed in on right now. Cardiology would be a distant third. And I think that the key here is to really understand that clinical validity, and having a lot of third-party peer-reviewed publications from the medical community. Neurologists around the world are publishing almost weekly now on these biomarkers and what they can show and what they can reveal. I think it's easy for the technology to get ahead of the possibilities. Having peer-reviewed science and making sure that it's well debated and show this in blood. We know blood testing over the last 50 years has been a very important factor for diagnosing disease. This is all about just trying to find it earlier when you still have a better shot of doing something about it. And I think that you start where the diseases are so lethal. I watched the soldiers in post-traumatic stress disorder and all the issues we have with mental health right now. We have pharma companies looking at all the different moods based on these biomarkers and being able to measure for the first time what is it that makes this group, this cohort of patients, depressed and suicidal. What's different about this group that's anxious and angry? What's different about this group that's like Gomer Pyle and they're happy-go-lucky, they don't have sleep disorders, they don't have concussions? Let's look at those and create the ways of the body to be able to navigate folks from these bad biomarker profiles into the good with the least amount of dosing to prevent side effects.
Right.
So I think it's the beginning of a new technology that can get overused, but if you don't push it and make people aware of it, well, you could actually sit in a situation where you're not preventing some of these major issues that our society has today that we think you can see the beginnings of it. And there's so many neurologists now and oncologists pushing us very hard to further advance this. And so we've put $150 million into perfecting this technology in the last 4 or 5 years. It's a major event of opportunity, but again, we have to stay controlled. I came out of retirement for this. I saw the opportunity being so significant to change the course of health. There's too many folks that are less than 50 years old that are getting in harm's way of cancer, harm's way of neurological issues. If we can see the baselines and have neurologists really mentoring that into society, I think we have a shot of really changing the way we get in front of disease and go after it long before it's a raging fire in your body with symptoms.
All right. I want to hear from someone out here in the back there. People are coming around with microphones.
Hi, Laura Hensey-Russell, Precision Research and Communications. I'm a big fan of the precision health concept. And the one area where I think we could also really use it, but I can't figure out how to get financial incentives there, is to analyze more some of the drivers of chronic diseases by seeing the changes that they make in the body earlier. So areas such as, for example, mold exposures. People with certain gene types really do badly with mold. There seem to be differential responses to the ability to fight off Lyme and co-infections that also wreak havoc on people. And also the dental space. Both sort of low-grade infections can have tremendous neurological consequences, as well as reactions to materials if people don't tolerate mercury or nickel or other things. So are there any ways in your powering precision health hat you can see financial incentives to do that, uncovering the drivers so we can forestall them?
Thank you.
The reason we actually went public about 4 months ago was to create a major awareness to the possibilities of what these technologies can do financially. I actually believe in the Powering Precision Health Summit. We feel that people could live 8 years longer, productive lives if you can start to see these baseline levels. And inflammation is probably the one area. The cytokines, being able to manage and see interleukins, interferons at their baseline levels. The beginning of inflammation is almost the basis of most diseases. So watching how different diets with heavy in sugar or heavy in growth hormones are affecting the inflammation cascades is a big key first area. Having Blue Cross Blue Shields and other payers starting to wake up to these possibilities is a way you can financially create incentives for healthy living. So we think access is another huge issue. I think you started to bring it up, Jim. Just getting good vegetables that are organic to most of society is very challenged today. And most of us are on diets that are just really cascading much of the inflammation that we're seeing and triggering many of the diseases. Sleep disorders is one big area right now. They're starting to look at these biomarkers at night when you're dreaming. Are you clearing the proteins from the cerebral spinal fluid into the blood? We now have NYU Langone running major studies with our biomarkers looking at the role of dreaming as an example and clearing those toxic proteins. We know people with sleep disorders have a lot of concordance with Alzheimer's and many of the neurodiseases, but now having scientific evidence to start to paint a picture of those biomarkers and the role that they're playing in health is key. And I think that you'll see prevention getting more and more interest. Cleveland Clinic has probably been one of the most advanced in really implementing some aggressive policies, eliminating smoking by all employees, and seeing the implications of that, to me, has been really an exciting experiment on how you can actually start to use this to financially move an entire clinic. And I think they've got a large employee base that they've been able to utilize and demonstrate this. So I do think that we have to get investors very excited about the possibilities of living healthily, and to not just focus only on treatments to cure people who already got the disease. And I think we're starting to see a major movement towards prevention of disease in the financial community as well.
Great. Thank you for your time,
Our
Kevin.
pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.